All right, well, good evening, everyone. Just kind of dragging it out a little bit here so that we can make sure that everyone who wants to be here for the start of the meeting has a chance to get in. I'm just kind of watching our participant list to see when it settles down a little bit. But in the meantime, I am Jennifer Dixon. I work with Eagle in our Environmental Support Division. And tonight we are going to be talking about a proposed air permit for the Generate Fremont Digester. Talk a little bit more about logistics for tonight's meeting here in a minute. But what I want to do first is make sure that I kind of go over a little bit of who's all going to be here with us tonight. And the first thing I want to do is just invite our Air Quality Division Director, Marianne Dolahanty, to do an official welcome to everyone here tonight. So Marianne, whenever you want, you can go ahead and turn your camera on and unmute yourself and take it away.
Okay, can you hear me?
We sure can.
All right, thank you everybody. And thank you, Jennifer. First of all, I want to welcome you to our first public hearing of 2021. And again, I'd like to personally thank all of you for taking the time out of your evening to participate in this info session and public hearing. We definitely appreciate your flexibility in participating with us virtually. And we know that this method of public participation isn't perfect for everyone. But we understand that these times are very challenging and each situation for each individual and your families pretty unique. We do have hope that 2021 will bring some positive change. So public participation is vital to Eagle. It is a very important component of our mission of protecting public health and the environment. It also creates avenues for us to have conversations around community concerns, a regulatory process, and to be able to discuss what Eagle's Air Quality Division's role is in evaluating a proposal that comes to us from a facility. So be assured that the draft permit that we're going to be discussing this evening is written with the public and the environment in mind. So I'll be listening tonight so that when I make my decision on the proposed permit, I keep your comments, yourself, and your concerns in mind. We welcome all your comments on the draft permit as well as on the virtual public participation process. So we're always looking at ways to improve our outreach. So thank you again for joining us. And at this time, I will turn it back to Jennifer.
Thanks a lot, Marianne. I appreciate that. And I can definitely agree with you that I have high hopes for 2021. So I'm just putting that out there at the start of the meeting tonight. So I want my other panelists, if you guys don't mind, turning your cameras on just really briefly here so I can introduce you folks right here in the beginning. So our attendees can kind of get a feel of who we have here with us tonight. So when they're thinking about questions they might want to ask, they know who we have online. And we don't only have Air Quality Division staff on here tonight, we also have some folks from our Materials Management Division. So I'll just quickly introduce everyone today. And I'm going to go in the order, the order that I see them, in the order that you will probably hear from them. So the first person that I can see on my camera list there is Michelle Rogers, and she is a permit engineer for this proposed permit. So you're going to be primarily hearing from her when we do a little bit of a presentation for you in a minute. She's going to kind of talk about what the proposed permit looks like, a little bit about Air Quality Division, what our process is, to kind of give you a little bit of a basis for what we're here for tonight. We also have Caitlin DeVries, and Caitlin is the inspector for the facility. She actually works out of our Grand Rapids district office. So she will be talking a little bit during the presentation and also available for question and answer. And then I've got some other Air Quality Division staff. I have Steph Hanksba. She is our air modeler. So her job is to basically look at what emissions might be coming out of this proposed project and how they might affect the surrounding community. So she'll be online. I've got Doreen Lehner, and she's in our toxics unit. She's a toxicologist. So she'll be here to answer questions as well. Susan Kilmer does air monitoring. So it's a little bit different than air modeling in that it looks at the outdoor air, and she would be available to talk with you all about what we're measuring outside and where the closest monitors are to this facility. And then on top of that, we also have Fred Sellers and Lonnie Lee, and they are here from our Materials Management Division. So they'll be able to answer some of the questions that are a little bit outside of the scope of our Air Quality Division. So hopefully you guys can see them, and I'm going to have them go ahead, except for Michelle, you can leave your camera on if you want, so maybe passing it over to you in just a minute, but everybody else can go ahead and turn their cameras off. So how the night is going to go tonight, and when I say night, I don't mean this is going to last forever. Hopefully, I'm sure you guys have better things to do, but the first thing we're going to do is do an information session. And what that's going to be composed of is Michelle and Caitlin, like I mentioned before, are going to give a very short presentation about air quality division, what we do, and then this proposed permit and how Generate Fremont Digester came to us with this project and kind of our review that we did. After that's finished, we're going to do a question and answer session. So I'm going to give you a little bit more detail on how you can ask those questions in a second here. But that will be a time when we will be responding to you. This evening has two kind of parts. The first part will definitely be able to answer your questions to the best of our ability. And if we can't do that tonight, we'll definitely get back to you. After we get done with the question and answer, which will either be at 7 tonight or earlier, if we get done with our question and answer earlier, we'll start the hearing earlier. So the hearing portion of the night is the time where you will be able to submit your comments on the record, but we won't be responding back to you. So that's really where you tell us how you feel about the permit and the things that you feel might be missing in the permit, or where we might have been lacking, or maybe there was a mistake that you see that we made. That's going to be your opportunity to do that. And you can do that in either writing or verbally. And we'll talk a little bit about what kind of mechanisms are available for you to do that. So we'll also talk about, if you're not ready to submit a comment tonight, but you still think you might want to, other ways that you have available to you to do that, either in writing via email, on our voicemail box, or things like that. I'll also talk about where to find other information that you might find valuable, and then how you can contact our panelists if you have questions about this facility or other facilities going forward. So, logistics, all your lines are currently muted, and we are recording this meeting. So we put all of our public hearings on our YouTube channel, on Eagle's YouTube channel. What we do is we take those and we transcribe them so that if we have folks that have English as a second language, they have an opportunity to at least read in their own language. That does take a few days, but anybody who's on the line tonight will get a notification from me, most likely, that that recording is ready and available to view. So you could pass it on to others or view it yourself if you would like to. So if you would like to make a comment or ask a question, what you're going to do is use the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen if you are watching us on our Zoom channel. I know we do have at least one person that has called in tonight, so I will talk to you about that as well. The other thing that you are going to need to do is, if you want to speak verbally, is click on that raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. So since we do have people that are phoning in, I just want to put out there very transparently that we have had a little bit of an issue with people wanting their phones to be unmuted. So what I will likely do is unmute anybody who is on the phone and just ask you if you'd like to ask a question. I know that's kind of awkward, but I don't want to miss anything or have you miss an opportunity to ask a question. So when we get to that point, I'll kind of talk about it a little bit again. But that being said, Michelle, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you. So as soon as you are ready, go ahead and share your screen, and then you can take it away.
Okay, thank you, Jen. Let me see. Make sure I pick the right screen to share. Okay, can you
That looks great. Yep, looks great.
Cool. Okay. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending our informational session. My name is Michelle Rogers, and I work for the Air Quality Division, or the AQD, as you'll hear us say many times. I'm the lead permit engineer for the proposed new permit for Fremont Generate Digester. I am just one of a few AQD staff that were involved with this review. And we're going to start with an overview of the Air Quality Division, and then we'll talk about the proposed permitting action. The purpose of the AQD is to protect public health and the environment, and the AQD has the authority to do this by regulating stationary sources of air pollution. This includes things like power plants, foundries, landfills, and many other industrial activities. The AQD fulfills several different functions. AQD staff monitor levels of air pollutants. We have other staff that look at air toxics to make sure public health is protected. We have staff that conduct inspections of regulated facilities, And we review applications and write permits for sources of air pollutants to ensure that their operations comply with all the rules and regulations. The AQD has the authority to regulate sources of air pollutants. However, there's a few things that we do not have the authority to regulate. If you have questions and concerns about issues surrounding zoning, noise, and traffic, those are issues that you'll want to take up directly with your local authorities. A few more things about permit approval. It does not supersede any requirements for other types of permits that may be required, and it does not supersede local zoning rules. I'd like to talk a little bit now about the permitting process and the steps that we go through for this process. First, an applicant has to plan out their project. Then they submit an application to the Air Quality Division. Then that application gets reviewed by an engineer, such as myself, and other Air Quality Division staff. In this stage, we're often asking the company for additional information, whether it's clarifying information or more information that wasn't in the original application. Then we draft up draft permit conditions, and it goes through an internal review process. The company or the applicant also has a chance to review and comment on the draft permit. And then the draft gets published for public comment. We receive comments throughout the public comment period and hearing. And those comments can potentially lead to changes to the proposed permit or changes to the permit decision. And then finally, a decision gets made by the decision maker. In this case, Marianne, our division director, is the decision maker. And that decision can be either to approve the permit as drafted, approve it with changes made based on the comments that we receive, or denial. Now, I want to back up a little bit and talk about the Fremont Digester facility before we talk about the draft permit. Basically, the purpose of a digester is to turn waste, such as waste food, into electricity and fertilizer. Now, how does it do this? Well, first, the facility in question, Fremont Digester, accepts various types of food waste, and those are fed into a digester. The digester is essentially a big tank where there are bacteria that digest the materials. And these bacteria produce a gas as they break down any carbohydrates or fats or proteins that is in that food waste. The gas that is produced by the bacteria is called biogas, and it contains methane and other compounds. And then the digested food becomes a solid liquid byproduct that is taken off-site, stored in lagoons, and applied to the land eventually as fertilizer. And as Jen mentioned, we understand that there are some concerns about this part of the operation. And, you know, we'll hopefully answer general questions about that tonight. However, I just want to note that those activities are outside of the scope of the air permit application for this facility. Now, the primary mode of operation for this facility is to burn the biogas in engines which produce electricity. And the waste heat from those engines is also used to heat the digester. If for some reason those engines are down, whether it's for maintenance or another reason, then the biogas can be burned in the flare at the facility. There also is a boiler at the facility that is capable of burning either natural gas or biogas. The boiler is not used often. It is really mostly just used for initial startup of the digesters to provide heat to the digester. Okay, so now let's move on to talk about the current application at hand for the Fremont Digester. There are three main aspects of this application. Number one, combine two existing permits for the facility into one permit. This is kind of an administrative step. We're combining everything into one document for the facility. This really makes it easier for everyone, including the company, the AQD, and the public, to keep track of all the air requirements that apply to the facility. Number two, this application was submitted to resolve violations by adding permit requirements for existing equipment. The AQD had identified issues at the facility and violation notices were sent to the company. One of those violations was for Rule 201, which is the requirement to get a permit. And this was because certain equipment at the facility should have been reviewed and written into a permit, and it wasn't. So really the only way to resolve that violation was for the company to submit a complete permit application for the continued operation. I consider this step 2 on this slide to be the largest and most important part of the permitting action, and we will talk about this in more detail in the next few slides. And then number 3, establish facility-wide emissions restrictions. We refer to these sometimes as opt-out restrictions. They allow a facility to opt out of the Title V Renewable Operating Permit. Title V is another air permitting program that AQD administers. It's for facilities with potential emissions above certain defined major source thresholds. Title V permits have to be renewed every 5 years, unlike permits to install, such as this one, which does not have to be renewed. So if any source can limit their emissions to less than the Title V thresholds, then that source is not subject to the Title V program. The proposed permit has limits for nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, and sulfur dioxide. Establishing facility-wide emissions restrictions, or what we call getting an opt-out, is not the only way that a facility can avoid being subject to Title V, but it is the method that provides the least ambiguity. The previous permit did have limitations that applied mainly to the engines, and those limited emissions to less than the Title V thresholds. But it wasn't as clear and straightforward as the new proposed permit, which has emission limits which cover the entire facility, and they require the company to keep records of their actual emissions for all of their equipment on a monthly and 12-month rolling basis. So as I said, we're going to cover bullet 2 here, which is about all the extra permit requirements that are being added to the permit in the next few slides. I want to highlight some specific aspects of the proposed permit conditions that are large improvements from the current permits that exist for the facility. First, I'd like to talk about control equipment. The proposed permit requires the company to submit updated preventative maintenance and malfunction abatement plans, which are in the draft permit as PM/MAP, it's an abbreviation. So this is for each control device and emission unit at the facility. And this has to be submitted to the Air Quality District Supervisor for review and approval. And if those plans are insufficient for any reason, the AQD District Supervisor can ask for them to be amended. The new draft permit also requires regular monitoring of some specific control device parameters, which we'll discuss in more detail. The 3 main pieces of pollution controlled equipment that we're talking about at this facility are the biofilter, the desulfurization unit, and the flare. The purpose of the biofilter is to mitigate odors from the waste receiving building. And the previous permit didn't have any specifics for how the biofilter was supposed to operate or how to tell that it was operating properly. So the proposed permit requires regular temperature and humidity monitoring for that unit, and for an alarm system that notifies operators if those values fall outside of the acceptable ranges. The desulfurization unit, the function of that unit is to reduce hydrogen sulfide in the biogas. And it happens before the biogas gets burned in either the engines or the flare. Hydrogen sulfide, which you'll see abbreviated in the permit as H2S, is a gas that has a characteristic odor of rotten eggs. So it is also regulated by AQD as a toxic air contaminant. When it's burned, hydrogen sulfide forms sulfur dioxide, and sulfur dioxide is also regulated. It's regulated under the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. So we look at these pollutants in a few different ways, and we evaluate them, both hydrogen sulfide and SO2. And of course, the reduction of hydrogen sulfide is important because it reduces not only any potential hydrogen sulfide emissions, but also sulfur dioxide emissions and any potential odors that could accompany those emissions. The previous permit didn't mention the desulfurization unit. It was overlooked. And the new permit requires it to be operated properly according to a preventative maintenance and malfunction abatement plan. It also has specific requirements to monitor the pressure and the oxygen levels of that unit, and for an alarm system to be in place to notify the operators if those parameters fall outside of their acceptable ranges. And then lastly, the flare. The flare is a backup method for burning biogas if the engines are down for maintenance or any other reason, and the proposed permit clarifies that in the conditions. So moving on, another area of improvement in the draft permit is testing and sampling, more of that being required now. When we're talking about testing and sampling, these two items on the screen are the main things. H2S, or hydrogen sulfide, sampling is required regularly in the new draft permit. And this is an important indication that the desulfurization unit is operating properly, and it's necessary to show that the hydrogen sulfide levels are lower than the emission or the material limit that is now included in the permit. For the engines, there is required testing, third-party emissions testing for nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and volatile organic compounds. All right, and then the last aspect of the permit conditions that I'd like to highlight is odors. The proposed permit will require the company to submit an updated nuisance minimization plan for odors to the Air Quality Division for review and approval. We believe that this plan, along with more stringent emissions controls conditions, the updated preventative maintenance malfunction abatement plans, and will help mitigate odors from the facility. And Caitlin DeVries is here tonight. She's the district inspector, as Jen introduced her earlier. She's going to talk a little bit now about her role and this topic. So take it away, Caitlin.
Thanks, Michelle. Hello, my name is Caitlin DeVries, and I am the inspector for the Fremont Digester, as Michelle mentioned. So I'm going to briefly talk with you about how inspections are conducted and how odors are evaluated. So when a facility gets a new permit, an inspection is typically done within the first 6 months of issuance of the permit. After that, all industrial sources, as with all industrial sources, they continue to be inspected on a routine basis. And the same goes for the Fremont Digester. Additionally, when an odor complaint is received, a complaint investigation is conducted, which may include additional on-site inspections. When an unannounced inspection is a tool that the AQD, Air Quality Division, uses to determine compliance with a permit and applicable state and federal regulations. Prior to arriving on site for an inspection, the inspector, such as myself, would observe the vicinity around the facility, checking for any changes or indications of a problem, such as an odor. The inspector then goes on site and conducts a thorough walkthrough of the entire facility, looking at all processes and process equipment, including equipment that is permitted and any equipment that emits a pollutant or an air contaminant. This also includes any control devices and the operating parameters associated with them. The equipment is looked at to be sure it's properly operating and meeting any and all applicable standards and limitations. After the walkthrough, to identify any physical issues on site, records associated with a permit are thoroughly reviewed for any issues, abnormalities, or potential violations. Next slide, please, Michelle. Thank you. When an odor complaint is received, the AQD responds to the location to observe the odor firsthand. The Air Quality Division Rule 901 is the regulation we use to address odor complaints, and the rule is presented here on the screen for you to read. We know that odor concerns are pretty high concern for people living around the facility, as well as the lagoons that store the digestate. But again, this permitting action is to address the odors at the facility and not the lagoons. Violation notices were issued to the facility for violating Rule 901B, unreasonable interference with the comfortable enjoyment of life and property. And these violation notices were also a driving factor for the new permitting actions. Next slide, please, Michelle. So how is an odor violation determined? Well, as I previously mentioned, when an odor complaint is received, the Air Quality Division responds to the complaint to observe the odor firsthand. We typically arrive at the complainant's location to observe and assess the odors. If the complaint is received at off times, say overnight or a Sunday afternoon, and we can't get out there right away, we use meteorological data to get into the appropriate location, distance away from the facility to account for that, so that we can observe odors the next day. If any odors are detected, we may investigate further at the suspected facility to trace the odors back to a specific process or process equipment. If the odors are strong and or persistent enough, we will write a violation notice. And when determining if we will write a violation notice, we take several factors into account, including some of these listed here on the screen, all of these listed here on the screen. We take into account the intensity, duration, and frequency of the odor. We look at the wind direction to see where the odors are going. Are the odors sporadic in nature, or is it a consistent odor? How long are the odors detected? Did it just start today, or has it been going on for weeks on end? Additionally, how often are odor complaints received? If we don't receive a complaint, we often don't know that there's an issue. And we also take into account if the odors are strong enough to be considered objectionable. And I'll get to what objectionable means in a moment here. If a violation notice is issued, the company must then respond to us in writing as to how they will mitigate the issue going forward. The AQD reviews their response to see if it's adequate. And if the company continues to have violations and odor issues, we can escalate the facility to our enforcement team for additional actions. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, we assess the odors based on the frequency, intensity, and duration. The AQD quantifies the odors using a 0 to 5 scale presented here on the screen as our tool to rate the intensity. 0 is not detectable at all, and 5 being the odor is strong enough to be overpowering and intolerable for any length of time. At times, we may be able to detect when we're out conducting an odor investigation, an odor that is distinct and objectionable, but very infrequent in nature or has a very short duration. There are other times where there might be a slight faint odor, but it lasts all day, every day. The mere presence of that odor does not necessarily mean a violation, but it could. The scale is used as a component for assessing the odors, along with what I mentioned, the frequency and duration, in order to determine if there's any potential violation of Rule 901. A violation can be determined with one observance, or it could take numerous observations. It's important to know that all of those factors, specifically the frequency, intensity, and duration, go into the decision-making process for issuing a violation of Rule 901. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Michelle.
Okay, thank you for covering that, Caitlin. We're just about ready to wrap up. In summary, just to summarize what the draft permit includes, we've reviewed all the emissions at the facility. This includes federally regulated pollutants, which are regulated under national standards, and toxic air contaminants, which were compared to health-based screening levels under Michigan's rules. We reassessed any applicable federal requirements and added those that were missing from the previous permits. And the company will be required to submit updated preventative maintenance and malfunction abatement plans and nuisance minimization plan for odors. And last but not least, we added new material limits, control device requirements, required monitoring of control device parameters, emissions testing, sampling for hydrogen sulfide, and record keeping, all codified in the permit and the record keeping to keep track of all of these obligations. So I'm going to pass it back to Jen now, and I think we're pretty close to getting to our question and answer session.
Yep, we sure are. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here a second, just so we can go back over again how folks can answer a question. Not answer a question. You all can answer a question. People can ask the questions. How about that? So we'll go ahead and do that. And if my panelists would like to go ahead and turn their cameras on, you can leave yourselves muted unless you get a question sent to you. But just to reiterate, if you are joining us online, you can go ahead and use that question and answer box. We already have a couple questions that have come in, so that's awesome. And type your question in there, and I will read your question and get one of our panelists to answer it for you. If you really feel strongly about speaking your question aloud, we can do that as well. You can just go ahead and click that hand icon at the bottom of your screen. Like I said, I know we were having some issues with the phone, people being able to be unmuted to ask a question. You can supposedly click *9 on your phone, and that will kind of raise your hand here, and I'll be able to unmute you, but I will just probably unmute both of you, and I apologize if that's awkward. Just say, no, I don't have any questions. I'll wait for a couple questions. So if you all want to think of what questions you may have for a couple minutes, that would also be great. Okay, so we're going to get here to just the reintroduction of our panel. You already heard from Michelle and Caitlin, so thank you ladies for that discussion earlier. Again, we have Steph Hengspa, she is our air modeler. Doreen Lehner is our toxicologist that we have online. Susan Kilmer does air monitoring. I always try to separate those two because they sound sort of the same, but they're different. And then I have Fred Sellers and Lonnie Lee from our materials management division here. So we're going to get right into these questions. Okay, the first question that I have is kind of talking towards the beginning of the presentation. Michelle, you had talked a little bit about how the digester works and had that diagram that was animated to show how things were going in and out of the digester. And it says, the question says, both the project description and the technical fact sheet mention manure as a material being fed into the digester. It was my understanding that this was only used at initial startup and when the digester came back into use, but not on any regular basis after that initial use a few years ago. So I don't know, Michelle, if you had any indication of what that looks like from the permit application, and if you don't, then maybe Caitlin could address that question.
Yeah, we just tried to list out any possible waste that we knew about in the fact sheet and then the published materials, but Caitlin and or Fred and Lonnie might be able to speak to that better than I can, because the air permit application and the air permit don't necessarily regulate everything that they're allowed to feed to the digester.
Caitlin, did you want to add anything onto that answer?
Yeah, and that is a question that I always ask on an inspection at a facility like this, any digesters that we have in the Grand Rapids district, on what their feedstock is. But that's more to kind of get an understanding of the odors. Typically, if I would suspect there to be an odor from something like manure, I don't recall in any of my recent inspections that they have used manure, but that's not to say that Fred doesn't have better answers for that. And because, again, like Michelle said, that's not anything that we regulate within the air permit.
I can speak to that.
Sure, thanks, Lonnie.
This is Lonnie Lee. We're in receipt of their waste in the inventory for October 2019 through September 2020. And it indicates that they use 0 gallons of manure. So as far as we know, they are not continuing to use manure.
Thank you for that. Much appreciated. This question came in, and the question is there a link to the Eagle AQD odor report form online? I swear there is. I cannot find it at the moment, but if you are interested in that, if you will go over some of the folks on the panel's contact information in a little bit. If you want to send any of us an email, they can always forward it to me, and I can get that for you and send it along. I know it's there somewhere. I just don't have it off the top of my head, so I apologize for not knowing that. That would have been a good one to have queued up here. This question is for you, Caitlin, and the question is, is what complaints specifically are you referring to? And the person is concerned that the complaints that they're filing aren't getting to us, or are they stopping at the digester? They've been told in the past to submit the complaints directly to Fremont Digester, but we don't necessarily require that people do that. We're always open to complaints. So maybe if you can talk a little bit about the complaints that you've been getting recently.
Yeah, I have been getting some complaints regarding odors from some residents in the area surrounding the digester. I've also historically gotten complaints from some of the complainants who live in and around the lagoons. But I definitely open to anybody giving me a call, sending me an email anytime that there is an odor concern at the digester facility itself. That would be the best way to get a hold of me and let me know that there is an issue. I know the digester has set up a online platform to log complaints with them, because I typically do stop in if I get an odor complaint and ask them about the operations going on at the time that the complaint comes in. So feel free to send all complaints that you have about odors surrounding the facility directly to me.
So question, I think I heard you say that the Fremont Digester has their own online complaint form? Yes. Okay. So do they send those, all the complaints that come there, do you get copies of those or not? I know some facilities that have their own online complaint form, and I don't necessarily know about this one, but they do share them almost immediately with us, and some do and some don't. So what's the case with this one?
As far as how that goes, I'm not sure, because sometimes we get the complaints at the same time, but I have not received any complaints in, I would say, the last little bit here.
Okay.
I'd have to look at the exact when the last date I got a complaint was, but the best way to get it, make sure it comes to me, is to send it directly to me.
Okay, so we'll go over your contact information at the end here for folks, just to let you know that that will be coming up. Another question that we had was, and this one's going to be for you, Michelle, with this permit, is there going to be any increase in emissions, or are the emissions just being documented in a different way, or put out there in a different way, or is the company actually increasing emissions with this permit application?
This does not allow any increases to the allowed emissions. I think that really this permit actually limits emissions in a more, it doesn't necessarily decrease the total emissions from the facility, but it kind of like makes it easier to track and show that those emissions limits that are in the permit are enforceable. When we talk about an emission limit being enforceable, we mean that there's other limitations that go along with it. Like there's also a material limit that says they can't burn more than this amount of gas. And there's also a hydrogen sulfide concentration limit that says it can't go above this level. So those kind of things, along with record keeping, monitoring of control devices, that all goes to making what we consider a more enforceable permit limitation.
Okay, thank you
I hope
for
I answered
clarifying.
the question.
No, that was good. No, I think it is a little bit tricky because it's not that they're necessarily changing anything. We're just kind of holding them to it a little bit more, is kind of how I look at it. So I will share the online complaint form with this. We're getting a lot of questions in here, not a lot, but a few questions about, okay, so, you know, what if I smell these odors in the middle of the night? What if they wake me up? What should I do then? So, you know, typically something like that, and I understand the concerns about, you know, if it smells really bad in the middle of the night and it wakes me up, what should I do? The inspector is probably not going to come out there at 2 in the morning. It is still really important for us to have that documented. We do have a pollution emergency number, alert system number, and I will give that to you all. I can give it to you now, and I can give it to you at the end as well. I know everybody doesn't necessarily have their pens and pencils ready, but that number is exactly for that. If you get woken up in the middle of the night and it makes you feel sick or gives you a headache or something like that, you know, that would be time to call. At that point, an inspector, you know, would address whether or not that needed to be responded to immediately. It still helps Caitlin, even if she's not there at 2 in the morning, when you're smelling that, identify what the heck is going on at that point that is causing you to have such strong odors that you're experiencing. So it's definitely helps us be able to do our jobs, which is make sure, or at least try to decrease those kinds of odors as much as possible. But that emergency number, and this would be for emergencies only, so obviously during the day, please call Caitlin. She said she would love you to do that, and I'll give you her number later. But that number is a 1-800 number, and it's 800-662-9278. So that would be where you would do that. You can also use our online complaint form, and I can go ahead and send that out to you guys in the chat. Now the chat feature, it's going to kind of show up for you. You won't be able to respond back in the chat, just to let you know, but I did also share a little bit of information about where you can find information on, and this is of course not going to let me do this right now, but I will do that in a little bit here for you. All right. Okay, I'll have to do that in a little bit for you, but we do have an online complaint form that you can fill out as well. And we'll share that either later on tonight, or I'll send that out in an email for you guys as well. So at this point, what I do want to do is I'm going to go ahead and we have our couple call-ins. So if your last 3 digits are 040, I'm just going to allow you to talk. And if you want to just say, yes, I have a question, or no, thank you, that would be great. I know sometimes it's hard to know if you what your own phone number is. So if your last 3 digits are 040, would you like to ask any questions tonight? And they might not be able to hear me too, so I will, and I'm going to go ahead and say, if your last 3 digits are 631 of your phone number, 631, would you like to ask any questions of our panelists tonight? Okay, awesome. Try to check in with you guys a little bit later as well, in case there are any questions that you'd like to ask. Okay, so let me get back to our questions here as well. Okay, this question is going to be, let me see. I think this should go to Michelle first, because this might have to deal a little bit with some of the requirements that we're putting in the permit as far as odors are concerned. So it says, does Fremont Digester currently have the required equipment to monitor the odor issues? And does this equipment require calibration, et cetera? So I don't know if you can talk about any sort of H2S type monitoring or anything else that may be associated with odors. That would be great.
Right, that's a great question. So there might be a few different sources of possible odors at the facility. We talked about odors from the actual waste that's being received in the waste receiving building, and there being a biofilter control device for that building. There's also H2S that has the potential for odors, and H2S is monitored. So that's the one that has required regular monitoring in the permit. They have a handheld meter, but the permit requires them to submit a procedure to us, basically outlining exactly how they're going to do that monitoring. And we have some very qualified staff that regularly oversee various types of emissions testing and monitoring. So we will be reviewing their monitoring procedures, and of course looking at their records when they start taking those required sampling. And I think I answered it. I don't know.
Yeah, no, you did, definitely. And there's another question that came in that's very much related to that. And this one's going to go to you, Caitlin, because it's a little bit of kind of a separation of tasks here. So the next question was, since Fremont Digester was in violation for not having a proper permit, I'm concerned about them doing their own monitoring and reporting and measuring. How will their records and reporting be checked? So can you talk a little bit, you did talk a little bit about your inspection procedure, but when we look at a facility's reports, and especially any testing reports or anything like that, that they have to submit or that they are required to do by their permit, inspectors pretty much fine-tooth comb those on a pretty regular basis. So if you want to talk a little bit about your process in regard to that, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, good question. Any sort of, I'll start with, I guess, with testing. So any testing that they do would get oversaw by myself and staff from our testing group. And we would review, that testing gets done, whatever frequency is written into the permit, and gets done. When the report gets received by the Air Quality Division, it gets reviewed by myself, and it gets reviewed by our testing group. And we do go through that with a very fine tooth comb, looking at all of the parameters for how the testing was conducted, all of the emissions to make sure that it's meeting any EPA methods that are required, and any parameters that are required by that method. For the other records associated with the permit in terms of or emissions reporting and etc. I typically, when I review those records, I get them supplied to me by the facility, and then I back calculate everything. I double check all of their math and make sure that what they're reporting matches all of everything that they're giving me. And I do take a look when I'm on site at the raw data coming directly out of the control parameters, their flows, if they have done a sample that day of how everything is going, to make sure that the snapshot that is on site matches the input parameters that they're giving me to calculate out their NOx, SO2, or any other emissions that they're calculating out. And I do go through those stepwise and back calculate everything to make sure that there's nothing getting missed in the math, and that everything is reported to the T. So it does get looked at very, very thoroughly.
Yeah, our inspection procedure includes reviewing all of those records, and it's a pretty concise way of doing it. And I'm not Caitlin's boss or anything, but I have read some of her inspection reports, and they're very, very thorough. So sometimes I go, wow, this is a lot of detail, but more detail is sometimes a good thing when it comes to inspection reports. And with a company like this, where they do have a lot of record keeping, and they will have more with this new permit if it is approved, there'll be even more for her to do as far as that goes. So this is an interesting question. It says, my understanding is that the Title V permit would need to be renewed every 5 years. So just to be clear, this is not a Title V permit that they're getting, not at all. But does the opt-out or would this permit that they're getting need to be renewed? So no, these permits are good for the life of the equipment, as long as that equipment is not changed, modified, reconstructed. They're very specific terms that we have defined in our air quality rules. So yes, it's good forever, as long as nothing changes at the facility. So anytime something would change, the facility would be required to look at those changes and determine whether or not they would need to come in for a new permit and submit a new application. So it's one of those things where, and again, this goes to Caitlin's role where she goes and does inspections. One of the big things that she does is look to see, have there been any changes? Have any changes happened that needed a permit that didn't get a permit? It's another thing that she's always going to be looking for. So even though non-Title V permits do not need to be necessarily renewed, they are constantly looked at in a manner of, has anything changed? Does this permit need to be updated? Does a new permit need to be submitted? So it's a really interesting question. The second part of that question is it possible to separate the permits so that Eagle can see if the Fremont Digester can prove compliance with regard to odor? So I'm not exactly sure what you mean for this. It wouldn't necessarily be up to us to separate the permits. It's actually a little bit easier for us as far as looking at all of the conditions in one place, for Caitlin to look at all the conditions in one place, for the company to look at all the conditions in one place, and even for community members that are concerned, am I seeing all of the permit conditions, everything that this company is required to do? It's all in kind of one document. So if Fremont Digester wanted to split their permits up again, that could be something that they could come in and apply for. Wouldn't necessarily be something that we would encourage them to do, and it's not something that we can require them to do. So I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, please feel free to kind of ask a follow-up to that. This question is going to go for you, Michelle. Actually, it might go to Caitlin. Caitlin, I'm going to put this one to you first. So this proposed permit requires downdraft equipment when the trucks are offloaded. Does Fremont Digester currently have and use this equipment, or would this be something new that would be added if the permit was approved?
So I guess I want to make sure that I know what they mean by the trucks for offloading. I'm wondering if they're referring to, and whoever asked this, feel free to tell me if I'm wrong, to when the digestate gets loaded into the truck to be hauled away to be stored in the lagoons. As far as the transportation aspect, the truck itself, that's not something that through this permit, I can regulate the truck itself. But we do, 901 again applies to any sort of process at the facility in terms of causing a nuisance odor. But as far as requiring the truck itself, it's not part of the stationary source because those trucks are going to be going through in and out and may or may not be owned by the facility. That's not something that we can put necessarily into the permit for the truck in terms of that, but potentially having them make suggestions to them to have it in terms of capturing any odors that could come from that process, we would capture through Rule 901.
So Michelle, can you think of what the questioner might be referring to when they say the permit requires downdraft equipment? Can you think of something?
That language doesn't show up in the permit, so I'm not exactly sure what they're
Okay.
referring to. At first, I was thinking about the trucks that bring in, the food waste that's going to be fed to the digesters. And as far as I understand for that, it happens within a building, which is controlled by the biofilter.
Okay, so that could be what they're referring to is the biofilter in place. Okay, I see we have a clarifying remark here. So it says permit number 378-08. So that must be one of the existing permits. The receiving building for receiving the trucks that pump are operated under a slight negative pressure during truck unloading operations and the evacuated air to be routed through a biofilter. So that is what you were referring to, I think, Michelle, as far as the building being controlled by that biofilter.
Yeah, I mean, as far as we're aware, since that's already in the permit, and I don't think Caitlin's issued a violation for that condition, they should already have that equipment in place then.
And any additions to that, we could have them address in their own nuisance minimization plan that's required, as far as any additional odor control parameters for the receiving building.
So that brings me to a question that I actually jotted down while you guys were talking, while you ladies were talking, sorry. And there's 3 different plans that we talk about, and we kind of glossed over them a little bit. You talked about the preventative maintenance plan, the malfunction abatement plan, and the odor minimization plan. So we say those words, and they're big words, and I think that sometimes people don't, why do they need 3 plans? What do those plans actually mean? What do they entail? I think it's important to emphasize the fact that those plans are given to our inspection staff, in this case, Caitlin DeVries, and she will review them to ensure that they are accurate, complete, and they are also living documents in that if they are deemed to be inadequate in any way, the company will be required to update them to further complete what their necessary task is. But what I was hoping that you guys could do is talk a little bit about what is the difference between those 3 plans. Why do we need a preventative maintenance, malfunction abatement plan, and a nuisance minimization plan? So Michelle, if you could kind of see if you can handle that, tackle that a little bit, and then maybe if Caitlin has anything to add, that would be great.
Okay, yeah. Preventative maintenance and malfunction abatement, they're all covered. That whole thing is kind of covered in our Part 9 rules, and it's also, I think it's Appendix A in the permit. And that it can cover a lot of different things, everything from how to operate your control equipment so that it doesn't break down, to what happens in case of any kind of failure. What kind of spare parts do you need to have on site to be able to repair something quickly? What kind of actions need to be taken right away in order to mitigate any kind of environmental, bad effects that might happen as a result of any kind of malfunction. So that, and Caitlin can probably give a lot more details on that than I can, but that is kind of all covered in the preventative maintenance and malfunction abatement plan. And then the nuisance minimization plan for odors is something that not as many different sources or permits out there have, but we write that into permits when there is a known concern about odors. And it talks about, how to respond to odor complaints, the need to do like an inspection to make sure everything is operating properly when there are odors reported. And that is also, I think I'm going to point people to Appendix B in the permit. And it's kind of listed out what that at minimum needs to contain in that odor nuisance minimization plan. I'll let Caitlin talk a little bit more about those.
Yeah, I think, Michelle, you did a good job kind of giving a summary of those. And the way that I looked at all three of those from an inspection standpoint is the preventative maintenance plan is your upfront, how do I stop it from breaking down? The malfunction abatement plan is what happens if it does break down, and then the nuisance minimization is something separate. So when I inspect against all of those documents, I'm reading through everything line by line. And in those plans, especially the preventative maintenance plan, I'd be looking for how often are they checking all of the functionality of the control equipment? Do they need to inspect the valves? Do they need to inspect any sort of gears or operating screens, even to make sure that the screens are gonna show up and show the right parameters? Does the gauges work? Are they calibrating the gauges so that they can get an accurate reading for the temperature or the pressure or the flow? Any sorts of those, because I will be looking at those in an inspection, and they should have a frequency associated with them. The malfunction abatement plan, like Michelle said, any spare parts, any action items that they would take if something does happen to break down. What are they going to do from a facility standpoint, and to not have any emissions exceedances or anything that they can do from a prospective type of look at this could be a problem with the equipment. How are we going to prevent that if it does occur? Then the nuisance minimization plan is what are they going to do in all aspects of the facility to prevent those odors? Like the now more understood question about the intake of the waste with the negative pressure, closing the doors, those type of things to mitigate any potential odor, the offloading of the digestate into the trucks. Those are things that they know that those are potential spots that odors could come from, and how are they going to prevent that? And if I'm smelling odor somewhere around there, I can pinpoint it back and say, well, it's coming from here. What are you going to do to fix it?
So that's a really good point. And we had a good follow-up to that. And this would obviously be contingent on this permit being approved in some way, shape, or form that included these three different plans. But the question was, will these three plans be available for public viewing? And if so, how would someone obtain them? So in the proposed permit, there is a time frame in which those plans need to be completed by, and I don't remember off the top of my head what that is, but maybe one of you could pull that up really quickly. And then we don't necessarily post those, if I'm recalling correctly, because of the type of permit this is. For Title V, which we had talked about briefly earlier this evening, those plans automatically get posted. We could either, if there was a big interest in those, we can either send a copy of those finalized plans. They're obviously available through our Freedom of Information Act, but Michelle, do you have an inkling, I know you have the permit there, how soon after, if this permit was approved with those plans, and how soon afterwards are they required to have those written and approved?
I'm sorry, I was muted. I think it
That's
says
okay.
90 days in the draft permit to submit those plans. 90 days after the permit gets issued.
Right. So if folks were really interested in those, we could figure out a way to provide them as well. So we have time for one more question. This is shifting gears a little bit. The question is the flare only on when the power is off? Also, does the Fremont Digester have to submit records to Eagle when the flare is in use? So do they have to record when they are using the flare? So maybe you can just go, I know you talked a little bit about that way in the beginning of your talk today about when the flare would be used, Michelle, but if you could just kind of cover that again, that'd be great.
Yeah, so in general, the facility, like it's in their best interest to operate the engines because those generate electricity, which generates income for them. So if there's some reason why the gas cannot be burned in the engines, then the flare is the backup method of burning the biogas. It's possible that the flare could be on while the engines were on, but the digester is really not designed to produce enough gas to be producing enough for both engines and the flare at the same time. We did evaluate the emissions under a worst case scenario of biogas being burned in both the engines and the flare at the same time. But that's not typically the scenario that the facility would be operating under.
Okay, thank you
And
for
I
that.
didn't answer the question about whether or not they're required to report to us or
Yeah.
record the hours. I'm just looking through the draft because I can't remember the answer to that at the top of my head. So I might be able to answer that in a minute here.
Okay, well, we're getting ready to shift over to the hearing portion. So if you want to put that in the chat, Michelle. But just so folks remember, you know, that wouldn't be a horrible thing to comment if you feel strongly about it, if it doesn't happen to be in the permit, or if you find that that's lacking. So that being said, I'm trying to dilly-dally a little bit here for you, Michelle.
Yes.
See if you can pull it up.
I just looked through it. So we didn't limit the hours of operation for the flare, but we did have a limit on the amount of biogas burned for basically the whole facility, be either the flare, the boiler, and the engines. And they have to separate out what goes to the engines versus the other equipment. So we will know how much gas gets burned every month in the engines versus the flare or the boiler.
Okay, and so does the facility required to keep a record of when the flare is being used as opposed to when the engines are being used?
I don't think that is in the permit.
Okay, great.
But that might be a good comment.
Yep, I think that's really helpful. So we're going to go ahead and shift gears over to our hearing portion. So if my panelists can go ahead and turn your cameras off if you'd like, and then Marianne will have you turn yours on. So we're going to shift gears a little bit here. I'm going to talk to you guys very briefly again on how to submit a comment and I'm going to read you a very boring hearing statement in just a minute, but it's kind of par for the course here. It's just to shift gears for us from when we're responding back to you to when we're just taking your comments. So there's a couple ways that you can do the comments. So just before I start reading that actual statement, just to go over that, if you want to write in a comment, you're more than welcome to do that. Just write the word comment before your typed in comment there, and I'll go ahead and read it unless you say do not read. Otherwise, that will become part of the permanent record. So any questions that you have asked are not considered an official comment, just to reiterate that one more time. You can also raise your hand. So as a reminder, if you are on the phone, you can go ahead and click that raise hand icon and you can speak your comment aloud. We have our 2 call-ins. I will unmute you just briefly again. Make sure you don't want to make a verbal comment. I want to make sure that we're not skipping you. You can try hitting *9 on your phone to see if that works as well. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and officially start the public hearing by starting off with the opening statement. All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this public hearing. My name is Jennifer Dixon. I am with the Environmental Support Division of the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, and I will be the hearing officer tonight. We have Marianne Dolahanty, Air Quality Division Director, the decision maker for this permit application, listening in on the hearing tonight as well. This hearing is for the proposed permit to install at Generate Fremont Digester, hereinafter Fremont Digester, located in Fremont, Michigan. The Air Quality Division is responsible for regulating sources of air pollutants to minimize adverse impact on public health and the environment. The law governing those responsibilities is Part 55 of the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act. The purpose of tonight's hearing is to give anyone interested in the proposed changes to Fremont Digester's air permit an opportunity to provide information the department may use in deciding whether to approve the permit to install or if there are additional issues to consider. Please note the proposed air permit is still a draft permit. This does not mean the department has already made a decision. Instead, it reflects an initial technical review of the proposal. We hope having the details of the draft permit available will help you in providing comments. Everything in the draft permit remains open for comment and further consideration by the department, including whether the permit will be issued at all. Please recognize the department can only use information you provide if it relates to the criteria the department must use in making a decision. For example, concerns related to local zoning, truck traffic, and noise are not within the department's authority. Some of you may want to simply express your support or opposition to the proposed permit. We will be happy to make note of your position, but please understand the department is, by law, not allowed to base our decision on whether there is widespread support or opposition to the proposed permit. This hearing is being recorded and your comments will be part of the information the department will consider in making its decision on the proposed air permit. The public comment period for the proposed permit began on November 25th, 2020, and it will end at midnight on January 14th, 2021. Additional information may be submitted through that time. After the close of the public comment period, the decision maker will review all written and verbal comments received. All significant air quality related comments will be considered, at which point a final decision will be made by the decision maker. The decision maker may deny the permit, approve as drafted, or approve with amendments. If approved, the decision must specify which provisions of the draft permit, if any, have been changed in the final permit and the reasons for the change. In all three scenarios, all interested parties, including anyone who was on the original mailing list, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended the public hearing will be directly notified of the decision. Included in the mailing will be a letter from the decision maker regarding the decision and, if applicable, the approved permit. As stated previously, you may submit a written comment at any time to the email box we will provide later. You may also type the word comment into your question box and submit your comment that way. I will read all comments you submit tonight unless you state do not read. If you would like to make a verbal comment, you may raise your hand and I'll unmute your line so you can speak. We'll limit your comment time to 3 minutes. If you are speaking, I'll let you know when you have about 30 seconds left, and I'll do my best to address commenters in the order your hands are raised, but please bear with us as the technology does have some limitations to this. Please recognize department staff are here tonight to provide a fair opportunity for you to express your views on the proposed permit and to listen to those comments. Thank you for your attention. I will now begin calling the names of those who have indicated they would like to make a statement. Okay. So I'm not seeing anyone's hands raised at this point. Just want to make sure I give you guys ample opportunity. So as uncomfortable as it is, the folks on the phone, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you again, just to make sure that you don't want to make a verbal comment. So if your phone number ends in 040, if you would like to make a comment, you can go ahead and do so. And it's completely okay if you don't want to. If your phone number ends in 631, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. And if you tap unmute on your line, you should be able to speak as well. Give you guys a little bit longer there to decide if you would like to make a comment. I don't want to cut anybody off early. I'm going to make sure that folks have ample time to speak if they would like to. We'll give you about another minute or so here. Okay, Marianne, if you're okay with it, I'm going to go ahead and close the hearing. All right, I just have a closing statement to read to everybody, and then we do have a couple of things we're going to go over after this to give you all a little bit more information on how to contact people, etc. Okay, so to officially close the meeting tonight, the hearing tonight. So thank you for taking the time to participate in this hearing tonight. We appreciate your interest in protecting Michigan's air quality. As indicated at the beginning of the hearing, the public comment period will close at midnight on January 14th, 2021. All interested parties, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended this public hearing will be directly notified of the final decision of this proposed permit. The hearing is now closed. Thank you again. Oh, Wanda, I'm so sorry. You know what? I saw that you just made a note that you would like to make a comment. I think just due to our technology, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk if you'd like to go ahead and make a comment. So there you go. Whenever you're ready, you should be able to speak. Okay, we should be able to hear you. If you're talking, I can see that you're unmuted. And I apologize that I'm still not hearing you. Let me try one more thing here. All right. I'm still not hearing you, Wanda, and I apologize. I'm actually going to try to promote you to a panelist and see if that's going to help at all. Let's see here. All right. So if you want to try now to unmute your line and see if you can speak. So I don't know if you see, I see that you are joining us via Zoom. So just make sure that you are unclicking that little microphone there on the bottom. So it looks like you're muted now. You want to try it one more time? All right, I greatly apologize that this is not working. I know you know how to get a hold of us, so if you want to submit your comment in writing, obviously we would love for you to do that as well. Again, I really apologize that that's not working for us for whatever reason. All right, so I want to go through a couple other things here before we sign off on the meeting. Just to let you know, and I know we have a couple people on the phone, so if you have a pen and a piece of paper and you want to write any of this down, I'm going to go ahead and read some of the addresses out that we can send comments to if you have them up until the 14th. So if you want to go ahead and send in a comment in writing, you can do that by sending it to our permit section manager, and that is Annette Switzer. And you can send it to Annette Switzer, and she doesn't mind if you spell her name wrong. She's our permit section manager, like I said, at Eagle AQD, and the address is P.O. Box 30260, Lansing, Michigan, and that zip code is 48909. Or you can email us your comments, and that goes to a special comment, public comment mailbox, and that address is, and I'll say it and then I'll spell it out for you. It's eagle-aqd-pti public comments at michigan.gov. So that's Eagle, EGLE -AQD -PTI public comments. That's all one word. So it's P as in Paul, T as in Tom, I as in igloo, the word public and the word comments. Squish it all together, all as one word, at Michigan, all spelled out, .gov as in government. Or we would love for you to use our voicemail. You can give us a call and leave a comment for this facility on our voicemail. And that number is 517-284-0900. And so you can go ahead and just speak your comment aloud into our voicemail. If you didn't get an opportunity, sorry, Wanda, about that, you can do that as well. Okay, so I had shared earlier today in the chat box, so remember that was different than the Q&A, information on where you can find more information about this permit. If you hadn't had a chance to really look at some of the background information or the proposed conditions, or we do have a thing called the proposed project summary, which is just a very high level overview of what the facility had requested. There's information such as that on there. So the easiest way to do that is just to go to our air quality page, which is michigan.gov/air, and then choose permits, and then permits open for comment. So if you have any issues finding this information at all, please feel free just to email one of us, and we're definitely more than happy to point you in the right direction. We know our website can be a little bit challenging. So right now what I'm showing on the screen is how to contact our air quality division folks that we had with us this evening. So the two key folks that I want to just focus on, especially for those on the phone, are Michelle Rogers and Caitlin DeVries. So if you want to get a hold of Michelle, the easiest way is to email her or give her a call. So her email is Rogers, M as in Michelle, the number 13 at Michigan all spelled out .gov as in government. And her phone number is 517-648-8218. If you want to get a hold of Caitlin, especially if you have complaints, so this is going to be really, really pertinent if you have complaints. Also just wanted to mention that Marianne, thank you very much, Marianne, did share our link to our online complaint form in the chat box. So you can feel free to use that if you have complaints. A lot of times it's just easier to give Caitlin a call. That way, if she has follow-up questions, she can ask them to you. But whatever you feel most comfortable with, you can send her an email as well. So her email address is DeVriesK1 at Michigan all spelled out .gov as in government. I'm going to go ahead and spell her last name for you, just in case you're on the phone and you want to jot this down. So it's D as in dog, E as in elephant, V as in Victor, R as in Robert, I as in igloo, E as in elephant, S as in Sam, K as in Caitlin, and the number 1, that's all like basically one word, at michigan.gov. And her direct line is area code 616-558-0552. So I hope that you guys got a lot of information tonight and that helped you out. I did want to share just one more time our PEAS number. We call it our pollution emergency alert system number. That is 1-800-662-9278. So you can go ahead and call that as well if you have complaints in off hours. All right. So thank you so very much for joining us tonight for our first air quality public hearing for the year for 2021. We really appreciate the time that you took tonight. We know you have a lot of other things going on, and this is something that we're very happy that you prioritized and spent it with us. Please reach out if you have any other questions, comments, concerns. Remember that comment period stays open until January 14th. So more than happy to take your comments up until then. And outside of that, again, greatly appreciate your time. I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting for all of you tonight. So I hope you have a great rest of your evening and enjoy all the snow.